to have Nikki Quinn, who has spent her career in corporate, helping companies like Coca-Cola, Unilever, Tiger Brands, Toyota, and so many more measure the success of their route to market and in-store strategy, customer service, brand health, and innovation strategies. She worked at global insights firm Nielsen, IDC, and Synovate, and is currently the retail lead at GFK. She consults to a range of clients on topics including business process improvement, lean innovation, leadership, communication skills, and the borderless workplace. She also owns Step Forward, the Center for Leadership Training and Excellence. Nikki, we're really honored to have you here today. Nikki has been managing high performance teams for over 20 years and is passionate about developing inspirational leaders. Much of Nikki's work over the past 10 years has been global, and she's developed the skills of engaging people online from across more than 70 countries. She also wants to help you develop your personal brand. Thanks so much for joining us here today, Nikki.
Thank you for having me. Great
Brilliant.
opportunity.
Wonderful. Would you mind starting off with just giving us a bit of background on the types of teams that you've worked with and managed over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Okay, thank you for that question. So just over 10 years ago, I was managing a team of about half a dozen analysts who were all based here in Joburg, and they were IT services, software and hardware analysts. And they reported into me here in Joburg, but in addition to that, they also reported into somebody who ran the programs that they were working on. So there was dual reporting. That was my first opportunity to be exposed to what we call matrix reporting. After that, I led a team that really was stretched all the way from Auckland in New Zealand across the entire globe, all the way to the west coast of the US, which was truly a global team. Every time zone in between, many languages, many different cultures. And over the last year, I've led a team of volunteers across 9 Southern African countries. So a lot of it has been done in the virtual environment.
What were some of your challenges really working with those remote teams and managing those remote teams? Because I know that, especially all across the world, so many people have gone into hard lockdown again. And in South Africa, so many people are petrified of, can they trust their teams? How are they going to engage their teams? So what were some of the challenges that you found in that remote setting environment?
So first of all, from a technical perspective, the first thing is that not everybody has access to the greatest internet, especially in some more developing markets. So the assumption when you're working with teams from the US is that everybody has fantastic internet. Well, they don't. They don't at all. So that's one of the challenges. Of course, there is a challenge in terms of tones. You really have to be quite cognizant that if you call for a meeting at 12 noon, that's somewhere in the world, it's midnight, and you really can't expect your team members to get onto a call and be hanging out on a call at midnight. They'll be exhausted and not performing.
Can I just ask a question on that? Just before you continue, in terms of time zones, did you find, is there like any app or website that you use to see what is the best time zone across platforms, or what would you advise people to make use of for that?
So I'm going to do a little bit of advertising. I use World Clock on my iPhone. But
I love that.
Yes. And you can also use timeanddate.com. That helps. And, even in the calendar, when you're setting up a meeting in a calendar, you can use and check out different time zones there. So that all helps.
Just another question on that. So I know it's not really team related, but have you found that light saving doesn't always get communicated well enough? Was that ever an issue? Because I have a mentor. Yes.
So yes, you're 100% correct. It's often people think they're going to get on a call, and in fact, the call is an hour later or an hour earlier than it was last week because that particular country changed their clocks. Fortunately, on the African continent, we don't have that, but it is something that we need to bear in mind. If you use your calendar, like your Outlook calendar or Google Calendar efficiently, you don't have to worry about that. It'll take care of those things yourself. It's when you're relying on people's memories to know that they have a meeting at noon, that's when it's going to become a problem. So it's worth highlighting to your team members, though.
Fantastic. Any other challenges besides, so you were referring to internet connectivity, time zones, we've been speaking about daylight saving, anything else?
So those are probably quite kind of technical issues that we've been talking about. Of course, there are more issues around engagement, and you mentioned your self-trust. So it really is important that you up your skills in terms of engagement. And I do say that, you know, a lot of people talk about virtual teams, and we do talk about virtual teams, but sometimes people say, oh, virtual, that means that it's not real. Well, it is real. We are real people. We connect with each other, whether we're doing it in an office together, in a boardroom together, or online together. It really is important that we connect. And there are skills that one can use and develop to ensure that you do connect with your teammates in this online or virtual environment. For instance, you and I have got our cameras on.
Yeah. Are there any other skills that, while we're on that point, that that you think that people need to develop to actually up their engagement level?
So there are some technical skills, but in addition to that, of course, there are things around understanding different cultures, okay? You're being digitally savvy, that's also important. So you do have to up some of your skills to ensure that you are able to communicate well in this environment.
What did you find, Nikki, when you were leading teams right at the beginning? You were talking about you were managing teams and working with teams across so many time zones and so many countries. What did you find in terms of culture that you as a leader and the team need to be aware of that could be
Yeah.
encouraging for other leaders and teams working with global teams across borders?
Yeah. So absolutely, one of the skills that you need is you need to have some cultural intelligence. The first thing you need to understand is that not all cultures are the same. And I came up with a really good example. And we know this here in South Africa, that there are many different cultures. And I found that generally speaking, African and Asian cultures, for instance, it really is their responsibility to take care of their parents as they age. And often they're living in the same home, and they would never dream of putting them into perhaps a care center. Whereas the culture that I come from, very Anglo-Saxon, European culture, and in North America as well, I think that frequently of course, we have a responsibility to our parents and the elderly people of our community. But oftentimes that responsibility is kind of ensuring that they get into a safe and secure care facility, an old age or a retirement home or a frail care center, depending upon what they need. So those are two things that are very different in cultures. And I wanted to use that as an example because it's highly unlikely that my elderly mother is ever going to be sitting in a room with me whilst I'm having a call. But there are cultures where grandparents, parents, elderly parents might be pretty close and demand some attention from people in your teams. And I think that one just needs to be cognizant of that as one of the examples. But of course, there are many, many differences in terms of various cultures around the world.
That is amazing. I've never actually thought of that because in so many of the virtual calls, what people very often speak about is that you need to close the door so that the kids don't run in, and they'll speak about pets and those kind of things. But no one has ever spoken about what if you are caring for someone that's frail and elderly and they can't hear well. And possibly, I think what's going to be happening as well is right now with COVID taking over the world, this person on a call might be a caregiver for someone else that might urgently need to do something. So to be aware of that they might have other people in their space and it might be different from what you are expecting. So did you did your teams have open conversations about their cultures and what is different and those kinds of things, Nikki?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is also one of the important things about operating in this online, virtual, borderless workplace environment is, if you and I worked in an office together, and we worked with people from France, Italy, perhaps a Maori from New Zealand, we would have conversations ask casual conversations where we went to fetch our coffee or we may go to lunch together. I think in this environment, it really is important to actually create those opportunities to share on a personal level as well. And very often, team leaders, if they're going to do that in the bricks and mortar environment, they would do that in a virtual environment as well. But of course, there are leaders who would think, I'm not talking to my teams about what they did at the weekend. But that's a style of leadership that I think works really well. And I do think that it helps us because we don't want to eliminate the cultural differences. We want everybody to be diverse and different. We want to embrace them and apply those strategies to actually manage individuals effectively.
And that's really what a team is about, actually understanding that the reason why you're stronger is because the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. My favorite quote of Aristotle, and that it's actually in the differences and the fact that there are strengths in the different team players that you're actually able to achieve so much more. Specifically.
Absolutely. Yep, agree 100%.
You mentioned something earlier, a concept that I was never aware of called matrix reporting. What does that mean and what is it about and for who is it?
Right. So many organizations, particularly global organizations, they will have people on the ground in a particular country or in a particular region. And somebody, for instance, I was based in the Johannesburg office. I would report to somebody in the Johannesburg office, but I'm working on a particular program. I'll go back to the IT example that I used earlier. For instance, if I was working on a program around personal computers, there may be a program lead for personal computers who's based in Dubai, the US, even Auckland, who's responsible for the program. So an individual may be reporting into two people, somebody from a geographical perspective and somebody from a program perspective. So it really is a cross section, something like that, where you're reporting into a number of people. And it's quite important to bear this in mind. A lot of people work in a matrix environment in this day and age. And it requires some different skills because you have accountability and responsibility to different people. It's important for your leaders, so whether you're a program lead or a regional lead or a global lead or a country lead, that you ensure that all the leaders are aligned in what they require from their teams.
That sounds so different from so many of the companies that I've worked with that's always top down. It sounds like a bit of a flatter structure, but still with accountability. So why is accountability so important for a team, Nikki?
Well, at the end of the day, that's what one of the key pillars of teamwork is, accountability, right? And individuals have to be held accountable, but leaders have to be held accountable as well. If there was no accountability in a team, you may as well not have a team. You may as well actually do it all yourself. So, I mean, I think that's at the very, very basic level, but accountability is critical for teamwork, without a doubt.
I totally agree. And I know that we are both major fans of Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And I was chatting to a leader yesterday, and it was so interesting. I was chatting to her about accountability, saying to her that she has children. And I said to her, would you leave your child so her child is going to grade 1 this year? And later on, obviously, going to have tests and exams as the little girl grows up. And I said, would you just leave her to her own devices if she's not doing her homework, if she's not doing her maths, if she's not learning to read properly? Are you just going to leave her and say, no, we'll see at the end of the year if she can read? Or are you going to have constant practices and plays, checking in, helping her? And that really, for me, almost on a discipline level with children, is what you would have with team members as well. It's about supporting them to actually reach their goals. It's checking in and knowing that both parties know this is the goal, but how far are you? Have you reached it? Haven't you? How are you going to otherwise redirect to still get to the goal, by not just waiting until the exam to say that this is now where the results are met? Because I was saying to her, for me, what I love of Patrick Lencioni's work is he says so many organizations just focus on results. And I've seen this. I've coached, recently I've coached so many sales managers and sales teams, and they'll put the KPIs will completely only be based on the sales target and never on the behaviors that you actually need to have to be able to get to the results. So by changing things around, we could actually impact the results ultimately.
Absolutely, 100%. And the other thing as well with accountability, and one of the other things that Patrick talks about in the 5 dysfunctions of a team, is so critical, because you've also got to trust your team members that what they say they will do, and what they do is what they said they would do. So yeah,
Definitely. Yeah, I'm a very big fan of his work. Nikki, how does one actually, what are some of the core skills? So we chatted earlier on, you were just saying some of the core skills that's needed to build a remote team. You say that there was some technical skills. Are there any others? And do you want to maybe just elaborate a bit more on the skills that's needed to build a remote team?
so to be honest with you, I think that the skills, there are technical skills around building a virtual team, without a doubt. But I think that the skills that one needs to build a team in a virtual or online environment are exactly the same as the skills that one would need to build a team if we were all sitting in an office together in that traditional reporting structure that you talked about, was, you know, a leader and 5 to 7 members of the team. One of Patrick's other books is called The Ideal Team Player. And I believe that to be a great team leader, you need to be a good team player as well. And he says that the 3 virtues of the ideal team player are being humble, being hungry, and being smart. And humble is, well, we all know what humility is. It's sharing success. It's not taking all of the glory. It's not making your team members responsible when things go wrong. Hungry is always wanting more, not necessarily this elbowing people out of the way to get to the top, but always wanting more responsibility, always wanting new challenges, wanting to grow and develop. And then the smart is around understanding people and being able to read people really well. And I believe that if you have those skills in equal proportions, you don't want to be heavy on one. and weak on the other because they don't make up for each other. If you have those three skills in equal proportions, you will be able to build a team either in the bricks and mortar environment or in the virtual, in online remote environment. It requires extra work on remote teams. You need to ensure that you connect. You need to ensure that you take time to engage with people. I know that 10 years ago, when I started working in this environment where we were on calls, a lot of the time we were dialing in. Very often it was just a conference call as opposed to video. But certainly the last year and a little bit before that, we saw video starting to become more and more important. And I tell people one of the key things is if you can, and I get the issues around bandwidth and connectivity and cost of data and so on, but if you can, keep your camera on, because if you don't keep your camera on, there is the risk that you're going to get distracted and pick up a book or pick up your phone or whatever it may be, and you need to be focused, just like you would be in a boardroom at a business meeting.
So it's almost giving you a bit of accountability, having the camera on, hey?
Yep, agreed. And it means you won't wear your pajamas.
So what are some of the ways in which a leader could engage with their teams online?
So one of my leaders that I had when I worked in the global team that I looked after everybody from Auckland to the west coast of the US. Her name was Esti, and she was based in Budapest in Hungary. And I remember her every single meeting at the beginning of our weekly team calls. Esti would ask us to do a little quiz. And sometimes it was a fun quiz. Yep, sometimes it was a fun quiz. Sometimes it was about the program that we were working on to make sure that everybody on the program team was aligned and knew what the next steps were or things like that. But it was just a way that she got us engaged, and it also taught us that we needed to be engaged. We needed to not come onto the calls unprepared, as so many people seem to think you can. But there are things, and there are many, many platforms that people are using. We're using something here today that I haven't used previously.
Restream, yes.
Restream, yes. There's Zoom, there's WebEx. I mean, people are also using Skype, Microsoft Teams. There's a tool called Blue Jeans. Many of these tools and platforms are very, very similar. I think most people are using Zoom most frequently. And on Zoom, you have the facility of using whiteboards, polls, putting people into breakout rooms, the chat box. You can go from very, very basic up to even a little bit more advanced as well. And I think we need to leverage the technology to ensure that we can actually engage with people most efficiently.
Definitely. I've also seen as part of the professional speakers environment that a lot of the speakers there have been complaining about Microsoft Teams, but I know that you are quite a fan because you've actually been using it with your teams very effectively. And what was quite interesting there is when they're sitting with massive groups of people, most of the people don't turn on their cameras. And I've seen this as a culture thing. I'm coaching a lot of people in the IT industry, and they work throughout the night, so their routine is completely different from other people. But what was very interesting for me is actually learning that you can still have engagement even if you can't see the people. You can still call on people to ask questions. You can still do that quiz. So even if you're thinking, like you were saying, originally you had a conference call, you were only reliant on voice. And I have an incredible mentor in Australia, and I've been trying to use some of her techniques as well, Leanne used, and she was saying people get so fatigued by Zoom and always having the camera on. Sometimes you should actually just do, if you're having a one-on-one with a client, just do a WhatsApp call. And then you can actually get up and walk around and get into the sun, and you're actually getting a bit of energy flowing So I have actually started doing that where the default used to be we're going to do Zoom, we're going to do Skype, we're going to always sit behind our computer. These days you can actually be on your iPad. There's a lot of different ways, but I think as the facilitator or the leader, you need to know, you need to communicate what tools are they going to have to be able to use, and will it be possible to use a cell phone, for instance, if they're going to be doing a Mentimeter or a poll. I'm not sure if you can do those from a cell phone versus a computer. So communication really needs to be very open for that. Have you
Agree.
found that people become really isolated working remotely, and what can leaders do to help with that?
So I think sometimes one does, and a lot of it does depend upon what your personal situation is at home, especially in this time where so many of us are working at home. I think for those that live on their own completely, I do think that that is a bigger challenge. But I also think that as individuals, we owe it to ourselves to really create our own support groups, right? You know, I've been members of book clubs, dinner clubs, wine clubs, cocktail parties,
Tupperware,
girls
I'm
club,
joking.
whatever, right? And we create our own support groups, right? And generally in this environment, we've kind of like stopped. And that's a lot of the time why people are zoomed out. And whilst I'm not saying you necessarily have to have another Zoom call, but there's nothing wrong. I'm actually a member of a book club, a book and wine club. It's called Corks and Covers. And we meet online once a month. We review a book that we've been reading, and we have a glass of wine. I have WhatsApp groups with a group of my female friends who are part of that support structure. You also can create, go to places like Meetup. I'm not sure if you're familiar with meetup.com,
Yeah.
where there's people putting together like in various interest groups, photography groups, even the groups that used to go hiking and camping, they will be doing something online, and I think it really is important to actually create support groups so that you don't become isolated, and because it can be quite depressing, actually.
I'm part of a quite an interesting support group in that, or accountability group. It's called 21 and 5 Right. And we are people all over the world that write in their own time for 21 minutes, 5 days a week. And there's different ways for us in getting together. There's a Facebook group, there's a WhatsApp group, there's an app that you could use. But I have found that people have shared books that they write. One of the ladies was talking about a book of Elizabeth Gilbert, Big Magic, and a book of Stephen King on writing. And I purchased the one, took a photo, shared that I bought it, and now a few other people have ordered it. So even though we're all across the world, we have never even spoken to each other. I feel chuffed that I've inspired people to buy a book on writing. So, Nikki, lastly, is there any etiquette around remote working?
Well, yes. Again, I think take what we used to do in bricks and mortar environment and put it into place in the virtual, remote, online space. Would you go to a board meeting in your pajamas?
No.
I certainly wouldn't. Would I go to, would I take my dog to a board meeting? I certainly wouldn't. There are little things like that I think really are important. You might take your lunch to a casual catch-up meeting with your local team, but you wouldn't take it to an executive committee meeting. You would hope that they would prepare supply lunch for you, in actual fact. But just be very careful. I mean, I've sat with people in the virtual environment and they've got their cat on their laptop and their dog on their lap. And they're not, I believe very strongly that if you want to show up, you've got to dress up, look professional. I heard somebody saying the other day, even shine your shoes. And I say, even put your heels on, because it does help elevate you and give you a little bit more confidence. And actually, if you're sitting down, putting your heels on is a lot easier than if you have to stand presenting for 30 minutes in heels. So there's quite a lot of things that you can do and that you need to be aware of in terms of etiquette. But I think the most important thing is what you wouldn't do in a boardroom or in a meeting room when you went to the office, don't do it on your laptop as far as possible.
Thank you so much for your time today. As we end off, how can people reach you? And I'll obviously supply all of the details afterwards and all of the links. And what can you specifically help them with?
Cool. So thank you. You can visit me on Facebook. My Jurka will share my details, I'm sure. But you can find me, Nikki Quinn. I also have a page called Step Forward. And I can help you with training, coaching, leadership excellence to manage yourselves more effectively and to lead your teams to success, both in person and offline. Because it's
Thank you
same,
so
really.
much. Thank you so much, Nikki. And let's go out and be humble, hungry, and smart, as Patrick Lencioni said. And thank you so much for your beautiful insights. It was really such a pleasure having you today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Jurka.